and says, check this out, I'm doing this thing called mining Bitcoin. And so he was doing, not quite using the same sorts of machines as you see on the side here. He built a rig out of graphics cards. Back then you could still mine Bitcoin with the GPUs just about. And after that I started thinking, what's this Bitcoin thing all about? And at first, when you went to the web back then, all you could see were these really dodgy looking websites, Mt. Gox, Bitcoinica, BitInstant. There's no surprise that none of these still exist today. But after the big problem with Mt. Gox in 2013-14, the fact that Bitcoin survived that was super interesting to me, because basically everybody said it died. The price had pretty much gone to zero, and that was one of the main metrics that people had to determine the health of these things. And so, if this thing had survived this gigantic inferno, and the network was still working and pushing out blocks and doing its thing, it becomes interesting. Because, we know that these cryptocurrencies are these supposedly decentralized networks people can use to transfer value, and that they're kind of uncensorable money. Well, this is kind of a situation where this thing is just completely, it's like a phoenix rising from the flames. Everything burnt down, the Bitcoin network was still alive, it was still going. So that got me really interested. And since then, I've just been going further and further down this rabbit hole. So, just going to talk to you today, like a little bit about a few different projects that I'm working on, and let's see what you guys think, if you have any questions, or if you can see kind of where I'm going with this in the kind of bigger picture. I'm going to try and keep a lot of the technical details out of this, because really what's the most interesting thing is what these insights mean for the possible futures of these things, and then what that means for the future value of these networks, which I think is something that everyone could be quite interested in. Okay, so it's always nice to know who you're talking to and what they want to get out of what they're listening to. So I wonder if you could just give me a show of hands or a nod or a wink, tell me if you're new to this stuff, or if this is something quite familiar to you, if you're traders, if you're interested in financial stuff, if you're interested in technology, like do you think that cryptocurrencies suck and you hate them, or do you think they're interesting? So feel free to jump in and interact as we go through. Alright, so I've put together a few things that don't look very related, and I'm going to try and pull them together, and we're going to see if there's some commonalities for these different kinds of little secrets that we're trying to tease out of these networks. Okay, so the first thing is like a general introduction. Why do these cryptocurrencies matter? What's the point? Why am I doing this? Am I wasting my time? Maybe. Okay. So, why does it matter? Now, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar by now with the state of the world today, how the money in our pockets works, whether that's HKDs or octopus or US dollars or renminbi or whatever it is. So, I guess you probably all know about broadly the way that money works, that governments kind of have a monopoly on issuing these things, or at least there's a central issuer that determines how much of these things get printed, how they flow through the economy, who can use them, and who can't use them. Now in the bottom corner, we've got the Iranian flag, the US flag, and the logo for the SWIFT International Banking Network. Now I don't know how much you guys know about SWIFT. It's kind of this, it's kind of a political weapon that can be used by powerful countries to kind of censor nation states by removing their ability to communicate effectively, transfer value with other nations. And so this has happened to a few other countries, like Venezuela got booted off SWIFT not so long ago. It now looks like it's about to happen with Iran. It's kind of one of these things that's hanging over people's heads. Yes?
It's SWIFT, but I think the SWIFT code.
The SWIFT code, the bank is a banking code. I believe so. Is this the same to do with like a IBAN, SWIFT, BIC, they're all these international identifiers of how, like a worldwide registration for the banks. It's a bit like the postal code, I suppose, for your house. So that one bank in Hong Kong can find another in Peru, or one bank in Britain couldn't find a bank in Chile. So they're kind of like these global identifiers, as I understand. I'm not an expert in the traditional financial system. I've spent some time studying finance in business schools, but I wouldn't call myself an expert in these things. The other thing to say is that it seems like the purchasing power of fiat currencies doesn't really last the test of time. So, I'm from Britain, from the UK, and money in Britain is called pound sterling. This is quite a funny story, because very few people seem to know where that comes from. So, a pound is a unit of weight, of mass. So a pound is 424 grams, and sterling is a level of purity of silver, 92.5% silver. So a pound sterling, you used to be able to go to the bank and exchange your £1 coin or note for 425 grams of 92.5% pure silver. Do you know how much that's worth now? It's worth a lot more than £1. It's like hundreds of pounds. So that's telling you that the purchasing power of the paper money in your pocket is declining over time. And that's usually because the issuance of it's being printed or it's being created, the credit money thing or the issuance of money is kind of running amok, let's say. That's the way that governments run deficits, they print money or they allow banks to issue credit, and this thing has kind of gotten out of control. So in the past you've seen a lot of what you call credit jubilees or debt forgiveness. And I'm wondering if we're overdue something a bit like that these days, where a lot of maybe not private debts, but commercial debts often get forgiven. You see this a lot in the Byzantine and the biblical eras, where there be these kind of big financial resets. So we're maybe due a financial reset now. I'm not the expert. I'd rather focus on building a new parallel system, and the old system can do whatever it's going to do. Okay. So, into Bitcoin. It's actually a picture from an article that recently published in a magazine called In the Mesh. And In the Mesh is a journal that's run by a company called GoTenor. GoTenor make mesh networking devices. Now, I don't know how many of you were here during the Umbrella Revolution, which was not that long ago. So, there was correct me if I'm wrong here, there was a fear that the GSM and Wi-Fi networks might be shut down. And therefore, people started communicating with a thing called Smesh or Smash, something like this. People started communicating peer-to-peer, phone to phone, rather than communicating through GSM, through Wi-Fi, through these centralized hubs, because they were worried that these central points were going to be switched off. So this is something that's already kind of been used a little bit here, which is quite interesting. So anyway, GoTenor make these mesh networking devices, these peer-to-peer networking devices, that are now being started to get used with Bitcoin. So you can start to transact with Bitcoin without internet, and then it starts to get quite interesting. Anyway, we'll come back to that later if there's a bit of time. Okay, so I don't want to go into the details of all of this technology stuff, but just to say that a nice way of thinking about how these cryptocurrencies work is this kind of stack. It's like a kind of a trifle, like a layer sandwich. So you've got kind of your infrastructure, your network, protocol, then your money or your social, depending on what they are. So when you look at it in this kind of layer format, then you start to be able to separate out the different properties of the network at the different layers. So this is a very simple one that's about to get made to look a lot nicer when it goes in the next article in the mesh. So this is the way I like to think of these things, where at the bottom you've kind of got your data layer, with the blockchain or how the data is structured itself. And above that you've got the protocol, let's say it's the Bitcoin network, how the nodes talk to each other, how the transactions are constructed, and so on. And then above that you've kind of got the economic layer, you could say, which is how people transact with these things, the monetary characteristics that these networks are just messaging networks. It's just kind of like email, except each message has value. So the protocol, you could think of Bitcoin protocol quite a lot like TCP/IP, which sends packets around the internet, or like email, which sends letters around the internet. But because these messages have value, then they have these emergent monetary characteristics. And then above that at the top, I would say, you've got this kind of socio-political, the human layer of the human aspect of this thing, where, you know, the different kinds of people that are involved in these networks. So with Bitcoin, you've got kind of miners, you've got the developers that write the code, you've got the users, people that run the nodes, you've got the economic participants, people like Genesis Block, who, you know, do trading and do, you know, wholesale buying and selling. These are all different stakeholders or participants in the system. And everyone has to kind of get along, maybe not completely, but at least partially, for these networks to kind of function healthily, or healthily enough. Okay. Has anybody come across Metcalfe's law before? So you've heard of Moore's law, maybe. Moore's law is super famous. The idea that computer power increases kind of with time, almost like exponentially. So Metcalfe's law is a bit similar to Moore's law, where it's kind of trying to say about the value of a network. So you've got to think of these things as networks. It's just a bunch of computers talking to each other, and everything is kind of emerging from that. So one of the ways we can try to assess the value of these networks is using this very rough idea that as the network gets bigger, it gets more useful. Think about a telephone network. When, what was his name, Alexander Graham Bell, when he invented the telephone, he didn't have anyone to speak to. So is that a valuable protocol right then? So then when he gives his mother the second phone, then there's one connection. So then that network is of two nodes, one connection. That's still not very valuable except to him and his mother. But when you've got thousands of phones, millions of phones, billions of phones, then it starts to become really useful, and that network becomes really valuable. So this is a very rough way that we can understand what people talk about with the network effects in these cryptocurrencies. Now I actually think that the idea of this thing increasing with a square is a little bit optimistic, because a square just kind of goes up and up and up and up forever, and there's usually a limit to these things. Usually these things kind of take off. So I'm not sure this works forever, but it's a good enough idea to use roughly. Okay. So there's lots of people trying to work out how to value these networks. You don't need to read too much into this. This is just a friend of mine, Donald McIntyre, who's trying to understand from an economic perspective how these different kind of aspects of the money, like credit money, narrow currency, lending, coins that get lost, coins that are idle, how those things fit together in the stock to flow of the economics of the money. So anyway, those are just different ways of looking at how these networks work and what might give them some value. So I'm going to talk to you about one project which is kind of a little bit wacky, which is not that much to do with value, but it gives you an interesting window into the possible futures of these networks. So I call it forkonomy, which is a combination of two words. So you may have heard of this concept of network forks in cryptocurrencies. We'll get onto that in a minute. And the concept of astronomy, which is kind of looking at faraway objects, trying to understand them without having a full view of the facts. So I say this is apples to apples comparisons in a sea of fruit salad. The reason I say that is because it's very hard to compare these cryptocurrencies with each other, because they're all kind of different. They start at different times, they have different kinds of people behind them, different sort of structures of organizations. Some of them are mined, some of them are not. So it's very hard to make objective comparisons. But when a network forks into two, those are probably the two most similar apples to apples comparisons that you can make. So that's what I've been trying to do, trying to make some apples to apples comparisons. Okay. So what's astronomy? Astronomy is when we look at the sky and we have objects from far away and their light reaches us. Now we can't go there and tell exactly what's going on, so we have to kind of observe, make hypotheses and infer what might be going on there. Now, astronomy, as you probably know, is quite successful science. We've learned a lot about the universe just from the light that reaches us from stars that are far away. So you've got things like these radio telescopes in the Chilean desert. You've got people using visible light. You've all kinds of different tools to understand where the history of these stars and try to understand their possible futures. So in the corner, you've got this diagram called the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. You don't need to know too much about it, except for, on one side, you've got how bright the star is, and on the other side, you've got how hot it is. Now, if you know those two things, you have a pretty good idea of what that star is going to end up like. It might end up as a black hole, or a neutron star collapsing on its gravity, or it might end up as a white dwarf, where it kind of loses all of its mass and turns into this kind of cold rock. Now, that doesn't sound very related to the blockchains, but bear with me. So, this is my friend Isaac Newton, my friend and yours. And so what he's doing here is he's taking light and he's doing this thing called diffracting it. He's separating it into all its constituents. Now, the analogy that I'm using here with Bitcoin and blockchains is that if we do data analysis, then we can go a step beyond the simple observation of these networks and start to get some deeper understanding of what's going on. Okay. So that's something you don't need to know much about. This is an experiment I did myself 15 years ago. The only thing you really need to know here is this is us on the ground doing experiments to simulate the conditions in space. Because we can't just go to space and see what's going on there. This is the closest we can get. So this is a bit like when you do simulation and modeling. So you can kind of develop a theoretical hypothesis and compare that with the results that you observe in the blockchain networks. Okay, so this is what we haven't got so far. We haven't got this kind of taxonomy or this catalogue of all these different kinds of forks. This is like a very early stage project where we're trying to tease out some interesting phenomena and see if we can work our way towards this kind of systematic understanding. Okay. So, the analogy I like to use here is that these forks, when these networks go from being 1 into 2, it's kind of like, have you seen the film Back to the Future? Most people have seen that, hopefully, where you have these parallel timelines. So think of these forks as kind of like these parallel timelines, parallel dimensions or parallel universes. It's quite a helpful analogy to make. So we'll start with what we call code-based forks. So this is a bit like copying and pasting a bunch of computer code. So think about, there's an operating system called Linux, and a lot of the world's most critical infrastructure runs on this operating system. Now, because it's open source, that means there's no copyright. Anybody can copy and paste it. And so it's been just turned into thousands and thousands and thousands of new projects as people use the code for their own projects and derivatives. So that's what you call a code-based fork. Now, on the right here, use this. This is kind of the same thing, but applied to a family of cryptocurrencies. So there's a family of privacy coins that use this thing called the crypto protocol. The first one is Bitcoin, and the most famous is Monero. And so they've all come from the same family, the same origin of code base. It's like a family tree, basically. You know, this is like the daddy or the parent is Bitcoin, and all of the children that have come off it. You can see that some of them are just 1 generation, some of them are 2 generations, or even 3 generations. As these things kind of get repurposed, get developed further. Okay. And that is something different to what you might call a ledger fork. So I can see quite a lot of stuff about Bitcoin Cash around here, so most of you probably heard about Bitcoin Cash. So Bitcoin Cash was a ledger fork of Bitcoin. So this is when a group of stakeholders or people decide that they want to change the nature of a particular cryptocurrency network, take it in a different direction. And so what you do is you change some of the rules, you could say, like the constitution of the network. In their case, it was to do with the size of the blocks in the blockchain. They decided they wanted to scale on the chain more. And so that rule change was not compatible with the existing Bitcoin rules. And so their network kind of split off, like this carrot from my lunch one day. It split off in another direction, and that blockchain grows independently. So you've now got 2 networks, 2 blockchains and 2 networks of computers working from that blockchain where you used to have 1. So here's a bunch of pictures from similar to copyrighted TV and movie shows about time travel and parallel dimensions. So just to reiterate that point, that these things can be seen as these kind of parallel timelines moving together that allow you to compare from one to the other. So, what makes a fork? I mean, every time, the way these blockchains work, it's kind of like a race. These mining computers will be racing in Bitcoin's case, every 10 minutes to find a block. And the way they do that is just like brute force. They're just crunching their way through this massive set of parameters until they find a lottery ticket that, or a bingo card that satisfies the rules, and then they can say bingo, and then the rest of the network will hopefully reach agreement that that's the new latest block, and people will continue to build on it. But sometimes there'll be two people that pull bingo at the same time, and there'll be kind of like a race across the network to decide who has the block which everyone agreed to build on. So actually there's a chance for these networks to fork at every block. The reason you don't hear about fork every 10 minutes is because most of them die. You could say that most of them aren't built upon. So you call those orphan blocks or stale blocks. So you really need some kind of something more than just finding two different parallel timelines to actually create a long-lived network. So this is a really interesting one from when Ethereum split into two networks a couple of years ago. There was a situation where something went really badly wrong, and there was two different proposed solutions. One of them was to let it happen, because the blockchain is meant to be immutable. You're not meant to kind of delete people's mistakes. And the other side was, this was a really big problem, and we should do something unusual about it. We should make that unusual step to change the history. And so out of that schism, out of that problem, there was a network called Ethereum Classic was born, and that was the network which decided to continue with the original Ethereum chain, where this mistake or this catastrophe happened and was allowed to exist. So at one point, this guy, Chandler, who's quite a well-known miner in China, said that he was going to attack this network because he didn't like he thought it was, this network is surviving was an attack on the whole Ethereum ecosystem. And then a week later, he says he's going to defend it. So this kind of shows you that these people that have, let's say, a lot of hash rate, or have a lot of media support, or have a lot of resources, can have a lot of influence on whether these things can survive or fail. These forks or these minority fragments. And here's another picture of some quite famous people that you may recognize. And these people have a lot of hash rate, have a lot of resources, have a lot of media outlets, exchanges, and things like that. And so with these people, they were able to make a very strong minority fragment called Bitcoin Cash out of the Bitcoin network when there was this disagreement about the best way to scale Bitcoin last year. So without these people, I don't think Bitcoin Cash would have gone very far. So that shows you how important it is to have these kind of well-resourced stakeholders in these networks. Okay, so this is a graph. You don't need to really scale it. You just need to look at it in a very general way. So what I call it is this chain dynamics visualization. And what you're looking at is on the x-axis is the chain time as the blocks get built one by one. And on the y-axis you've got the time on the clock at the time. And so this line should be pretty much straight if the blocks are coming regularly and smoothly. And you can see the blue one's Bitcoin and the red one's Bitcoin Cash. So you can see the blue one's pretty smooth and the red one's much less smooth. So I've been trying to work on a way that we can use this kind of visualization as a tool to understand the health of the network, how regularly it's issuing blocks. And where the arrows are on this chart is where Bitcoin Cash kept changing the what we call the difficulty algorithm, which is how the network decides how hard it is for the miners to find the next block. So they use that as a kind of incentive to bring the hash rate over to the minority chain to help keep it going, to help keep it healthy. So that's kind of where a lot of my work is, trying to find these kind of new tools and new lenses that we can view these networks. Okay, so here's quite an interesting thing that has been observed. And it's kind of the opposite of fork. So a fork, if you think about it, is one network going into two. Now this thing, this fork merge, is more like two networks going into one. So there was a project last year called Bitcoin Private. And what they did was they took the Bitcoin blockchain, the UTXO set, the list of everyone's balances and coins, and they merged it with another coin called Z Classic. Now you can see here that there was nearly 17 million Bitcoin issued, and there was about 3 million Z Classic issued. So when you add these two together, as they did, we ended up with a coin that has almost all of the coins issued, even more than Bitcoin. And that's interesting because Bitcoin is the oldest. So this coin kind of then gives an idea as to a possible future of Bitcoin. So that's the interesting, unusual thing here. Now maybe you've seen this graph. This is how the issuance of the coins changes over time. So when Bitcoin started, it was issuing 50 coins per block, and then it halved after 4 years to 25, and here we are now at 12 and a half. Now Z Classic is quite a young coin, so it's still in the first halving. But when you join these two coins together, you end up one halving ahead of Bitcoin. So what's interesting about this is, you've got this coin which has issued almost all of the outstanding balance. The fiat price, the token price of the coins is very low, and then that means there's not much of a bribe for the miners. There's not much reward for the miners to point their machines and their electricity at this network. And as a result, it's like a defenseless network. It's like somebody never locks their front door. So the security of this network is very low, and as a result, it just keeps getting attacked. So this is the price chart of Z Classic, and this is the parent coin of Bitcoin Private. And this purple line here, this is the price chart of Bitcoin Private. So it's quite an unnatural chart. I'm sure you agree. Like that doesn't look like a normal price chart. So there was a fork that happened here as well. They already forked this into a different network, and then this one was when they made the announcement for Bitcoin Private, and that's where the fork actually happened. So that was 100x. This big pump here did 100x, and now it's come back over 99%. So it's really what goes up must come down, and it really has. So this network, last time I checked, it's less than $50 an hour to 51% attack this network, which basically means you can disrupt this network, you can stop transactions from happening, you can even try to attack the exchanges just by paying $50 an hour to out-muscle the rest of the mining resources on the network. So ask yourself, are you going to keep your life savings in something that costs $50 an hour to disrupt? It doesn't even seem like it makes sense to do payments with that. So I'm not sure what the value proposition of this network is right now. Maybe they'll take some steps to fix it. There's some technical steps, technical mitigations that can be made to fix the situation. And really, this is kind of one of the possible futures of any of these minority networks, like Ethereum Classic and like Bitcoin Cash, unless they retain a value proposition, unless they retain a incentive for the miners to defend the chain, or there's some other mechanism by which they can prevent these attacks from happening. Okay, so this is just summing up what I said just now, where I call this like compare with stars. A star that doesn't retain its gravity, that doesn't keep its mass, we call it a white dwarf, just this kind of cold rock, dead rock floating through space. And that's kind of what Bitcoin Private is. So there's just, I wouldn't buy this coin if I were you. I don't see much of the future there. Unless they fix a lot of these problems, which is possible, but I mean, there's thousands of other projects out there with healthier fundamentals. So really, what this is like the nightmare future of Bitcoin. Like if Bitcoin fails, it will look like this. If the token price of Bitcoin isn't high enough, that the reward for the miners to defend the network isn't high enough, or that a transaction fee market doesn't develop, which means that people pay the fees on the chain to make up for the subsidy going away on Bitcoin, it will look like this. So we already know what Bitcoin looks like if it fails. It's this. So the point of this is that blockchains are kind of these time machines. They have their own internal synchronicity. In Bitcoin, each block is basically 10 minutes. So by jumping forwards in time, by doing this fork merge, we've kind of got to look into the future. And so now I'm looking for other interesting anomalies like this to see if we can see some of the possible futures in some of these other networks. Okay. Is there anything about that little bit people want to discuss before I jump to the next thing? No? Okay, we'll jump to the next one.
Can you explain that?
This is just a picture. This is just a cool picture. So people are trying to separate out different kinds of cryptocurrencies by either their uses or by their kind of number of forks for their kind of like food, lemon coin and pasta coin and pizza coin. It's just a picture, just something they can't be reading.
So on one of the previous slides, you talked about on the whiteboard slide.
Yes.
TX trade exchange.
TX transaction. Yeah, so the idea of the fee market, the idea is that, so last year, I don't know if you remember, when Bitcoin was at its very height, people were paying really high fees on the chain to make transactions. So at one point last year, the amount of fees that the miners took from transactions was greater than the subsidy, greater than the reward. So that's what we call a fee market. So when the block reward goes away, the transaction fees are going to have to pay the miners, otherwise they aren't going to defend the network, and then we end up with this nightmare situation. That's what it's saying. Yeah, good question. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call taxonomies. So I guess you've probably all seen this before, the periodic table of the elements. I used to be a chemist, so this is something that's kind of familiar to me. My old professor is actually one of the biggest connoisseurs of this thing you can imagine. He has ties with the periodic table on it. He's a quite crazy guy. If you look him up, he's YouTube famous. If you look up the periodic table of videos, he's got 1 million YouTube subscribers, and he just does these crazy YouTube videos of things exploding and all that kind of stuff. Very cool guy, Russian professor with big grey afro, interesting guy. Anyway, so what this is a way of classifying knowledge, of understanding all the different chemical elements and how they're related. But this is kind of where you end up after 100 years or 500 years of trying to understand stuff. So you don't really start, I don't start here. So actually where you start, we'll go back to our friend Newton. I actually went to the same school as Isaac Newton now, by the way, that's why I like him so much. So this is kind of more the Newtonian thing, this kind of occultist, almost like witchcraft. You have the elements, air, fire, water. And people were trying to make these very simple comparisons of how materials were related, similarities and differences. And gradually, theories improved, like we confirmed the existence of atomic nucleus, of electrons, and things like that. And then it started to help people put these things together into new rows or into these spirals to try and understand how these elements are related. And so, yeah, I've been kind of trying to do something similar with cryptocurrencies. And that's quite an ambitious task because cryptocurrencies are even more difficult to experiment with than these elements. At least with these elements, you can add acid to them or you can dissolve them in water. You can see how they behave. With cryptocurrencies, we don't really have that kind of physical laboratory that we can do these things. So anyway, I've been building this thing called token space. It's kind of a way to put these kind of taxonomies, kind of put these classification mechanisms together in a way that's easy to understand. And the problem I've applied it to is the kind of uncertainty over laws and regulation in cryptocurrency space. So right now, I read something literally this week about Hong Kong regulator making some guidances. And really, it's happening every day. The regulators make a different announcement every day. Rules change every day. So wouldn't it be helpful if we had a way of trying to understand how the properties of these things were similar or different, or if they looked on one side rather than another? And that could help people like exchanges, or regulators, or lawmakers, or the people that issue the assets to avoid making mistakes which will give them headaches further down the line. So, yeah, just some pictures of funny cartoons of law stuff going wrong in cryptocurrency. So, these are some interesting recent things. Like, so what happened in the summer was one of the SEC staff said that he thought that Ethereum, or the token Ether, started off as the token cell was a security, which means it should be regulated by the same laws that regulate the same stocks and shares. But now that he said, but now it's sufficiently decentralized that it's not. So that brings up a whole bunch of interesting questions, like, where's the boundary? When did that change? Why did it change? How did it change? Was it the number of nodes on the network? Was it the people involved? Was it the value of the thing? Like, we just don't have these kind of solid knowledge to make those decisions. So I've been trying to build a conceptual framework about, what are these things, with relation to regulation, compliance, and laws. We have quite a lot of history of people like Aristotle and Jevons talking about the different properties of money. So people say that cryptocurrencies are like money. That's one of the things that people compare them to, right? People also compare them to commodities, digital gold, digital oil, these kinds of things. And we've already talked about securities. So I've been trying to come up with so these are some simple taxonomies, simple classifications that people have already done. But they're trying to put these things into these kind of general buckets, you could say. I call that naive classification. It's a bit like when you do your laundry and you're sorting it out. Well, there's my shirts, there's my shoes, there's my scarves. It's descriptive, but it's not explanatory. So what we really need is something that's more explanatory, so that people can design these tokens to avoid some of these regulatory headaches and problems. So, and this comes on to this idea of crypto economics. So you might have heard this term before. It's kind of trying to apply the idea of economics to these cryptocurrency networks, because they work somewhat differently than these previous, the existing financial assets and legacy systems. Okay, so because these networks have all these different characteristics in them, which we can check, okay, good. You have this idea where there's kind of economic considerations and the social layer. You've got the kind of monetary side, you've kind of got the legal side, and then you've got this kind of physical and digital computer elements as well. So that doesn't sound much like a lump of gold or a piece of paper money. It's, these things are more complicated. So it's hard to say, Bitcoin is a money, but it's not a security, and it is a commodity. Those are very black and white distinctions. So what I'm trying to do is come up with the shades of grey that help us understand these things a bit better. So this is a nice quote that I like, but I won't go into it too long. So because we've had this massive proliferation in all these tokens over the last year or two, there's now thousands of these things, all trying to do different things, designed in different ways. And so a bit like the way that evolution worked, we end up with all this complexity, and then you see which ones survive, right? But the difference between here and evolution is we can design these things so that we can try to learn from mistakes and learn from the past and try to tweak these things to give them a better chance of survival. Okay. So people have tried to understand, what creates the value of these networks. Is it an investment basis? Is it something that has utility? Is it because of the value of the network, or is it because of the people that issued it? So that's one way that you can start to pick these things out. Now, we already talked a little bit about this, but crypto assets are different to these traditional instruments. Right? I would say that the main cryptocurrency assets, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and things like that, they're more like gold and oil. They're more like commodities, and they are like debt-based things like bonds or credit money. So, this is one other quite important thing to bear in mind, that you've got the protocol, you've got the kind of network of computers and the way they communicate, and then you've got the token or the unit of account that's issued on top of it. And those are two kinds of different things, but they both feed into the characteristics and the properties of the asset itself. Okay. So coming back to this set of legal pronouncements again. So people are talking about, in the courts, people are trying to decide whether Bitcoin's money or not. They're trying to decide whether Ethereum is security or not. And trying to decide whether ICOs should be regulated in the same way that stocks are regulated. So this is kind of an idealized three-dimensional space that I've been building. It's unfortunate that the legend isn't so clear, but what you can see here in the top corner, this is a security. This is an ideal version of the security. I picked out Apple stock. So we know that's a security, we know that's a stock. You get cash flows and dividends from holding it. And it represents some rights in your underlying. It represents some voting share or some, dividends are kind of like a profit share from the company. And so let's see what else we've got. Bitcoin, I've put kind of down here. So it's not very much like a security at all. It's very good as a commodity in my opinion. It's probably the ideal digital commodity. I also don't think it's much of a money yet. Like, it's not that easy to use on the stream. Like, there's a lot of more development and barriers we need to jump over before we get there. So, you know, these are the three characteristics that I can build in this space on. How much of a money something is, how much of a commodity something is, and how much of a security, how much of a capital asset something is. The way that I come up with these scores is using what you call taxonomies, these classification frameworks. It's kind of complex, I don't want to go into it here. I've still not really finished building them. But if you have a visual space that you can compare and contrast these things, then it helps you to understand what kinds of design choices you can make when you're building these assets to avoid falling in the trap of, say, where I think XRP is, which is way up here. So, I mean, I kind of feel like XRP has a very high risk of being regulated for security. And that's why they keep on capturing all the regulators for their conferences. They're trying to avoid getting regulated by the SEC, in my opinion. And so remember what we said, that the guy from the American regulator said that at the start Ethereum was a security and now it's not. So that kind of says that it's passed through this boundary, it's passed through this space where it used to be a security and now it's not. So if that's the case, you could then kind of draw a line. This is just some arbitrary imaginary line for visual reference. So it's kind of saying that imagine that Ethereum started off here, and it was a security. And it's moved through this boundary downwards, and now it's not a security anymore. So if you have a tool like that to help you understand the design choices you're making as you're creating these networks and these assets, you might avoid some of the uncertainty that's around all these networks now, which I would say is a large reason why the market sentiment is so negative at the moment, because people are waiting for governments to make their minds up about what these things are, how they should be dealt with or regulated or whatever. So anyway, these are just kind of the tables that I've been working on. This is from a paper that I'm writing. I don't want to go into it too much here. Feel free to contact me or look on my website if you want to see some more information about these things. I'm trying to compare them between legacy assets like Apple, gold coins, Swiss francs, Bitcoin, Ethereum, trying to put these things in a way that we can compare and contrast them. And that's the idea of how much of a commodity something is. So I've said that here, for example, here, before the US dollar went off the gold standard, you could basically exchange your dollars for precious metals. So it functions quite a lot like a commodity. But these days I'm not so sure, because you can't just go to the Federal Reserve and get gold back from your dollars. It doesn't really work like that anymore. And here's some tweets where I've been thinking out loud about some of these ICOs, about, you know, some of the properties that make something a security according to traditional laws, and some of these ICOs, what they've done. So this is a particularly interesting one called Gnosis, where they kept hold of 92.5% of the tokens after the sale. And the token itself, the GNO token, is kind of like a capital asset. So you would stake the GNO to get a second token called Wiz, which is what you would use on the prediction market platform. Now that kind of sounds like dividends. When you've got dividends and you've got this insider concentration, it kind of sounds like a capital asset, sounds a lot like a security. And they sold it to American investors, so I'm wondering what's going to happen there. Yeah, I actually know somebody who works there. It's quite interesting. They never answered my questions about it. Okay. That's kind of how the economics of their system was supposed to work. Oh, the other thing to say is the system isn't functional. It's been a year and a half since the sale. It's still not functional. So if you sell a token in a sale before the network's functional, it's also kind of like a claim of future assets, which is also a bit like a security. Anyway, that's just a little bit about that. I've also been looking at what you might call insider asymmetries. So in the real world, we've got all of these kind of unfair systems, right? Dictators, cartels, mafias, oligarchies, that kind of thing. Yeah, we've seen it since forever. Now, in these cryptocurrency networks, you've kind of got this balance of stakeholders You've got miners and developers and users and economic participants and all the rest of the exchanges and so on. Now, they have to be relatively well balanced for these networks to function smoothly. And also, because the blockchain is quite transparent, it means that if there's any funny business going on, people have to be a bit more subtle, a bit more clandestine about it in order to avoid getting spotted. So that's a really interesting book that I found called The Protocol by Galloway. He's actually talking about TCP/IP, about the internet protocol. Well, if you read this book, it's as if he's talking about blockchains and the hidden power inside them. So, this is what we were supposed to get. We were supposed to get utopia. It was supposed to be this place where everyone's got the same amount of power and influence, and anybody can do what they want and they're free, and it's a new world. But I think we've ended up somewhere between this, what we call plutocracy, the rule by the rich, and so that's the Senate, that's the US government. And the joke is that the captains of industry are these gigantic fat cats behind them that really control everything. This is from, 125 years ago, 130 years ago. So we ended up something from that, between that plutocracy and this kind of, ancient Egyptian kind of pyramid scheme thing, and this thing that we call the tragedy of the commons. Have you heard of this term? So the tragedy of the commons is kind of where you have a shared resource. Think of like your local park, but there's no incentive for anybody to look after it. If there's no incentive for anyone to look after it, it falls into disrepair. So that's basically the two extremes of these blockchain networks. Because there's nobody in charge, you have to be careful that on one side we don't go for the plutocracy, where we just have rule by the elites, and on the other side we have the tragedy of the commons, where nobody cares because there's no incentives. So we need to be somewhere in between those things. The balance needs to be found. But I would argue, the more I've been looking at this, that all of the different balances that have been struck by these different networks are kind of not perfect in different ways. So we're going to talk just really briefly about a few of those. So have you heard of masternodes? Heard of masternodes? Okay. So in these peer-to-peer networks, like it's a really simple network like Bitcoin, all the nodes are the same. Yeah, they have the same kind of duties, let's say, validating the transactions and accepting the blocks. In a masternode network, some of the nodes can have extra responsibilities, and they get some extra rewards for doing some tasks for the network. So in a network like Perl, which is a fork of PIVX, like similar to Dash, you have different kinds of masternodes which either host content, like video, or they host static content, or they help to validate transactions and perform other duties for the network. Now, if you think about what a masternode is, oops, we're going the wrong way. Masternodes kind of become one of these steps on the pyramid, where they're above the little people, but they're below the founders of the network, let's say. So masternodes have these kind of cartel-like structures in them. Now there's another mechanism, apart from mining, called delegated proof of stake. And this is a bit like how Parliament works, where you elect a representative and they go off to the Parliament and they make decisions for you. You don't hear from them again until they need your vote in 5 years' time. And so these are some of the coins that have DPoS systems. And these DPoS systems are very, very prone to cartels, extremely prone to cartels. And EOS is the biggest one. You've probably all heard of EOS by now. So EOS has this situation where 21 nodes have the right to produce the blocks. And there's a competition between about 100 nodes, 100 block producer candidates to get into those last 21. And it's been seen that there's been some kind of funny business going on with those 21. So, depending on which way you look at these networks, you could say that some of them are more or less decentralized, or the power is shared more or less. Now, I'd say that this diagram is kind of not telling the full story. This is kind of making the delegated proof of stake look fair, fairer than proof of work and mining, because these are mining pools. So these aren't individual miners, these are kind of like cooperatives of miners that get together. But the pools don't control the hash rate, they just aggregate it. So this is kind of a way that cartel might make you think that their system is fair, and it is. That's how I look at it. So, people have started to find out that EOS has kind of got this cartel thing going on. And indeed, it's kind of been built in from the start. It's kind of engineered that way. So, you could say it's a design choice by the people that made the network. But they saw how Ethereum is, the way that Ethereum is scaling is by basically centralizing. It has to kind of scale in, as we say. And so, less and less people will be able to validate all the transactions and have complete history of the blockchain. So EOS has just kind of seen where Ethereum is going and started from there to make a much more efficient, high throughput system. So whether or not you think that's a good or a bad thing is really just a matter of taste. I'm personally on the side where I like to see everyone being able to validate all the transactions, more of that Bitcoin type system. So I prefer to see the nodes having equal rights, you could say. So, have you guys heard of the DAO? Did you hear about this from a few years ago? This was when I said earlier about the catastrophe in Ethereum. This is what it was. So, the original promise of Ethereum was that we could build unstoppable applications that would never get taken down by censorship or anything like that. This DAO thing was this kind of decentralized investment fund, you could say. And it was very successful at getting the investment in. Took a third of all the Ethereum, or a sixth of, I can't remember now, a sixth of all the Ethereum, something like that. Now, some people already found that Vlad Zamfir is the guy that's in charge of Casper, like for transitioning Ethereum to proof of stake. So he's one of the main researchers in the Ethereum Foundation. These people were calling for patience because they were worried that this system was already looking a little bit fragile, looking like they'd rushed into things and needed to test it a bit more. And what happened not long after it launched was somebody found a way, they didn't hack it, they exploited it, using the rules as it was written, draining the funds from this thing into a place where they could steal it after 30 days. So that's what led to the fork between Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. But what's really interesting about this from this kind of governance situation, that's just a funny thing, what's interesting from a governance perspective is that they did this thing called a carbon vote, which is kind of like an on-chain vote, one token, one vote, you could say. And there was this very small amount of coins that voted, and you can see here that just one voter had this much say. So it's a bit like you have an election in Hong Kong or London or England or wherever, and only, I don't know, 3% of the population votes. And then they say, okay, well that's good enough, we'll respect the will of the people. So that's, yeah, some people have issues with that. That's kind of like it was seen as a way that the Ethereum Foundation could get the result they wanted from this perhaps not representative vote. So again, this is a bit of a way of seeing that the insiders of Ethereum kind of use this mechanism for their own advantage. Okay. So I'll skip over this. This is some work by a friend on how we can design DAOs. It's really interesting. I recommend you look it up if you're interested in DAOs, Theodore Waitel's MSc presentation. And so I'm going to talk a little bit now about some kind of bigger picture stuff. I'm just going to do a time check, make sure we have enough time to do this. Yep, I think we do. So this is something I'm really interested in because my family originally came from Iraq, which is a country in the Middle East that kind of used to be really affluent and a really quite secular, free place. And then we got a dictator, and then everything started to go quite wrong. And the problem back then was that there weren't ways to get your money out of the country, to leave the country, to get yourself out of the country, to get your wealth out of the country. And things started to get confiscated. People used to use gold, as they do in a lot of places in Asia. Gold's very easily confiscated at the border, or by a guy with a gun, or whatever. So I'm very interested in this uncensorable nature of cryptocurrencies, and especially Bitcoin, especially because we don't have a leader. There's no leader. I think that's probably one of the best things that Satoshi did, was to leave and disappear. So pretty much every other network you can identify a person or a group or a company or a foundation that's kind of either the implicit leader or the explicit leader. And the problem with that is, if you're a nation state and you don't like what's happening, you know who you can go and speak to, or speak to make things happen the way you want. So this project is called Reaching Everyone. The idea is to widen access for cryptocurrencies and for blockchain-based technologies. Now, this sounds like, if you're living in Hong Kong and you trade for a living, or you're a finance person, you might think, why do I care about a person in a faraway place, whether they get to use Bitcoin or not? Well, I would argue that if we can get a wide part of the planet using these things, people with different levels of infrastructure and technology, that's kind of the mass adoption that you might need to really see these things cement themselves as part of our societies. And that will probably have implications for the price of these tokens and the economic value of these networks as well. So this is a slide from 6 months ago, but it's come back into the news this week. Have you heard about the Blockstream satellite? So this is, it's not an actual satellite that they built, it's rather some space and some satellites that they rented, and they broadcast the Bitcoin blockchain down to Earth. And it's now reaching almost all of the planet, at least where humans live. So that means, it doesn't matter if, government switches off the internet anymore, you can still receive the blocks. Now, that's just one-way traffic at the moment. So you can't send blocks via the satellite yet. I think they're working on that. But there's other ways that you can send transactions to the blockchain, to Bitcoin, and to have them written in the blockchain without internet. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of these. You can think of them as guerrilla technologies. We're trying to think about using these networks in different ways. So I spoke very briefly about mesh networking earlier. So GoTenna is this mesh networking device, this thing right here. You can pair it with your phone so that you can make a transaction on a wallet like Samurai, even if you don't have internet. So hopefully this is the new version of the presentation. I have a picture of it later. And these are some of the different ways you can transact on the right. SMS. PDF, you can put it in a PDF and then send that PDF to somebody and they can broadcast it for you. You can even send it with Morse code. You know Morse code? Yeah, like radio. Yeah, you can do it with radio. So there's all kinds of ways that we can build these systems to transmit the data. Ultimately, these are just messaging protocols. A Bitcoin transaction is only 300 bytes. It's not a big piece of data. So you can send this, lots of different ways. It doesn't just have to be kind of the standard way that we think of now. So this is a nice diagram. So think of this middle zone as your kind of censored zone. Think of it as like where you can't use the internet. And so this is hopping from one mesh node to another until it reaches the open zone where it can broadcast the internet. So imagine you're in North Korea. You must make a transaction. But you're 20 miles from the border, let's say. If there's enough places that you can hop from node to node through this peer-to-peer system without the internet until you reach somebody that isn't censored, that can broadcast the transaction, then you have a way that you can avoid this censorship. So when we talk about censorship resistance and uncensorable money, this is where it's going. Until now, these have just been words that people have been using to talk about these things. It's now becoming a reality. We can actually have uncensorable money. That's something really interesting. I mean, we're not far away from a place which has heavy restrictions on internet usage. So I'm sure you can see the value of this. And so these are just different ways that people can get onto these networks. I mean, even we have Tandem notes here, right? We're in there. So these are different kinds of vouchers, like pieces of paper that can have been preloaded or reloaded with cryptocurrency, like Polypit, Tanga, Bit notes. These are hardware wallets. You can also see some of them up here. So, just the idea is here to give people a sense of all the different ways that they can store, transact with these things. It's not as narrow as it used to be, and as time goes on, there'll be more and more different ways that we can use these technologies. And that, for me, is something super interesting, because it tilts the balance of power back towards the individual, away from the institutions, away from the governments. And that's what I really think the value of these technologies and these protocols is all about. And so these are, I don't know if we have something like this in Asia. Azteca and Bitrefill are kind of like topping up your phone online. Like you go into a shop and you get a voucher, and then you can call a number and have it credited to your Bitcoin account. I don't know if you've got something like that in Asia yet, but it's a super interesting idea. You should look at it for Genesis Block. Look at Azteca, or Bitrefill. So here's just some cool stuff that we've noticed. So if you look on this hashtag on Twitter, you'll see like we collect cool stuff and talk about it there. This is a van that goes around South America with the satellite to talk to the Blockstream network, and it goes around small towns in South America teaching people about Bitcoin. You know, places that may not have internet, that may not even have regular electricity, but using these kinds of technologies, it's not so far away for people to be able to access these things. This is a friend of mine who, and it's not a video, unfortunately, it's just a screenshot. The video's on YouTube and Twitter. He's connected a Raspberry Pi to a radio, and he's using the Morse code to broadcast transactions. And then this is something called LoRa, which is another kind of messaging protocol, sort of in the range of mesh networking. You can push these messages a bit further out without, it's a radio frequency protocol. You can push these messages out. And this is a guy in New Zealand who used to be a cop, so he understands what cops look for, if you know what I mean. And he's using these Go10 mesh networking devices to send transactions. I think he sent this one over 10 kilometers away. So he managed to find a way, like, not just one to, like point to point, he set up like a real-in node to bounce across it and to signal boost it. And so, again, the more range we can get on these things, the more people can use these technologies. There's a guy called Nick Szabo, who is one of the guys that was around at the start of cryptocurrency. Even before Bitcoin, he worked on DigiCash. And he's working on this thing called Global Financial Access, where they're using long-range radio waves to get like significant penetration and coverage. So think about going deep into a censored territory. You know, tens of kilometers, even hundreds of kilometers in. And if you can open up hundreds of kilometers to people to transact with these things, that changes the game, especially for them. Now, one of the main points that people bring up when we talk about this project, which is one of the points of the project, is to widen access to people that are living under economic or political pressure. People say, well, aren't these cryptocurrencies too volatile for them to store their value in? And I'd say that, in a way they are at the moment, but when you're sitting with hyperinflating money in your pocket, you become more open to possibilities than if you've got something stable like relatively stable like HKD or USD in your pocket. So if you've got a pocket full of Iranian reals or Venezuelan bolivars, you're probably going to consider this as more attractive. Even given the volatility in cryptocurrencies, it's less than volatility in their currency. At least with cryptocurrencies, we have two-way volatility. In those currencies, it only goes one way, it just gets weaker. So, but these are early days yet. You can see that we're in the very early days of these technologies. We're still building the basic components and elements and devices that we can use to make these networks efficient and to be usable worldwide. So don't lose faith in these bear market times. We're still at the beginning of this journey, this experiment. So we built a proof of concept at Hackathon in Europe last year for a web wallet for people that are displaced peoples. So think about people that live somewhere that becomes a war zone and they have to leave. So we built a wallet that could be used on the web that was designed for people that have intermittent access to technology. We're not talking about people with smartphones in their pockets. We're talking about the kinds of people that end up on those crazy boats going over the sea trying to escape wherever they're going to. So they have like minimum access to infrastructure. Trying to think about what the problems that they face are. The insecurity, the fact that they might be extorted, they might lose their stuff, might be stolen, might fall in the sea. So, The easiest thing would be to use your mobile phone, right? Everyone's got a phone, until you have it. So I've lost 2 phones in my recent years. One fell in the sea, the other one was taken from me at gunpoint. So you can't always rely on having your phone. You need kind of another layer of defense. So what we came up with was a wallet. Oops. That's the kind of, try to visualize the journey of a migrant and the kinds of problems they might face, and from that, to determine what kind of technology solution that might be useful for them. So we came up with this web wallet with as little technology requirements as possible, something super simple, something that may not be as secure as a Trezor or a Ledger wallet, but when you're in this kind of situation, some relaxations of the security and the trust model are acceptable. Like you basically don't have much choice, So the idea is that, say you're a family and the son is the one that's leaving on the journey. You would set up the wallet before he goes, and then you only send money into it when he's safe. So if he gets extorted or people try to take his stuff, he doesn't have anything with it. So it's the idea to minimize this downside risk of extortion. So that was the mock-up. I don't know if this link still works, the slides from 6 months ago, but the idea was that you could create a wallet using personally meaningful information, like the name of the river, the name of your dog, the name of your sister, and so you could more easily memorize some of these things. At the same time, you don't necessarily have to carry all of it with you. Maybe the family can keep some of this information, so that if you get extorted, you can't access that stuff. Okay. So this is another situation where the sort of uncensorable nature of these cryptocurrencies is really, that's the most important thing here. And so that's pretty much it. Just to give you, to hope you have an idea of the kinds of stuff that I've been working on with Parallel Industries, and we're just an independent, non-profit research organisation, so we're always looking for people to collaborate with us. If any of you are crypto millionaires, you're more than welcome to sponsor us, or if you know some, then point them in our direction. And it's all going on this kind of work to better understand these technologies and to build some of these new solutions. So that's pretty much it. Thanks very much for your time. And if anybody has any more questions, we've still got a bit of time.